Welcome to today's Strategic Communications speaker event, Automation and Design, How to Avoid a Deeper Digital Divide. This is a topic that could not be more relevant, even critical, to our lives, our work, and our collective and personal well-being, as the digital divide threatens to widen existing socio, demographic, and economic rifts even further. We are very fortunate to have Howard Pyle, Senior Vice President in MetLife's Global Brand and Marketing, as our speaker today, and Ethan McCarty as moderator of the discussion afterwards. Let me introduce Ethan. Ethan is the founder and CEO of Integral, an employee activation agency serving leaders of communications, HR, marketing, and technology. Formerly the global head of employee and innovation communications for Bloomberg LP and global director of social strategy for IBM, Ethan has more than 20 years experience leading digital communications, engagement, and marketing initiatives at scale. Strategic Communication Program is very proud to have Ethan as a member of our faculty, teaching 2 courses, Employee Activation and Digital Media and Analytics. So without further ado, let me turn the floor over to Ethan.
Hello, and thank you so much, Dr. Billmeyer. It's such a pleasure to be with you virtually, though we are, and with so many colleagues and students in the Columbia University community. This is, as you said, it's a very pressing topic. The access to digital has never been more important and more divisive when it comes to socioeconomic status, region, locality, background, race, religion, so on. I have the pleasure of knowing and having worked with somebody for whom this has become beyond just an intellectual interest or a side idea, but has really become a passion and a driving, kind of driving force for his effort. And that's Howard Pyle. Howard is somebody who I've known for more than a decade and has been, well, I'll let him tell you a little bit about his own experience, but he has been a founder of digital agencies. He has worked at some of the world's largest digital agencies, including Ogilvy, and he has led digital initiatives at scales that are like simply jaw-dropping for brands like IBM and MetLife. And he's now been busy over the last year or so putting together the what is now a nonprofit, experiencefutures.org, focused on remedying and addressing these issues, studying them, coming up with solutions, and I think in an extremely compelling and elegant way. My agency, Integral, has had the absolute honor to support some of this exploration, and as it's taken shape. And I can just say we are in the first heartbeat of what I think will be a lifetime of positive impact. And with that, I want to turn it over to you, Howard, my friend. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak with this community, who I hope will really take up what you have to offer here.
Great, thank you so much, and thanks for having me. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm very excited to bring this topic to you, and I do want to focus on the social and digital issues that are at play here. I should do the very formal disclaimer at the beginning of this that I'm here representing my own views. I'm not here speaking on behalf of MetLife as my employer, but I am here representing the ideas that are part of experiencefutures.org, which is, as Ethan said, this a new nonprofit that is, in fact, a social enterprise focused on addressing the question of the digital divide, and specifically looking at automation and how AI and machine learning will impact that over the coming decade. So I'll take you through the thinking behind that. I think it's probably not to dive too deeply into me, but just to give you a little bit of background. I have a very broad career. I've been in the digital space my entire career, always at the intersection of design, experience, product development, and technology. I started my career as a developer. I've always been a designer. The past 10 years or so, I've been focused on large enterprises. I've been at IBM. I ran a network of design studios there. I ran developer marketing. At MetLife, I'm responsible for the global customer experience and design program. We relaunched the global brand for actually the first new global brand in 30 years. So my team was the one that got rid of Snoopy. That's my notorious claim to fame. And but I previously was as Ethan said, I was at Ogilvy, and I ran digital there, and I ran agencies, and I've founded startups. I founded a mobile startup. I founded a consulting group that was focused on the kind of internet era mergers and acquisitions space. So I've had a very wide ranging career. And the reason why I tell you this is not to pitch myself, but to say that I have like all of us do, a unique vantage point to some things that are happening in the market. And this thinking it comes from touching all these different types of organizations, touching a number of different disciplines, and touching a number of different roles, and having played different roles on the vendor side, on the client side, within technology, within design, within the arts. And so I just wanted to give you that context. Some of these things I speak with more authority on than others, but this is definitely about the intersection of ideas. The starting point and the real thesis here is to say that we've reached a place in our world where digital privilege equals real world privilege. And I'll take you through briefly what I mean by that. But if you look at your life today, especially in a post-COVID or hopefully post-COVID era, we do so much online, and what we have the right to do, what we are empowered to do, the tools that we have available to us, they are the tools that we have to use to navigate our lives. If we can't go and access, for example, the Social Security Administration's website, well, then we are disadvantaged if we can't go in person, right? The question that I'm really trying to address here is, how can we design more equitable experiences online? And what does that look like? And I'm going to take you through what I mean by design and what I mean by experiences, because those are two fairly generic terms that have a very specific meaning in my world. So basically, here's the thing that I want to start with. Our digital lives are shaped by a collection of apps, sites, content that every organization that we interact with publishes. Every organization is in fact a digital publisher. COVID has accelerated the need for us to move to a place where we interact with government from a digital perspective. The financial institutions that we interact with all publish apps, tools, experiences, content. The entertainment that we engage with, the social media content that is created both by individuals, but by organizations of every shape and size. And so every organization today is now a digital publisher. And the thing that I want to describe to you, and the starting point of this, this organization was really the observation that there is a wide range of experience automation tools that are now becoming available in order to let organizations and individuals publish new apps, new websites, new social content. And this really runs the gamut from journey automation, which is a kind of a very fancy term for saying, how do people move across different digital experiences? This is a very data intensive process. And so a lot of these new tools from Adobe and companies like Qualtrics help us move across the journey. User experience design. So how does a specific app or site function visually? Where is the button? What does it look like? What does it do? There's new tools from companies like InVision and Adobe, but also startups like this company called dBuild, where you can literally write in English a description of what you want your app to be, and it will automatically build it for you. There's visual design tools like Looka and Canva. And these are tools that allow you to, again, describe what your organization or your mission or your content that you want to create, and it will generate logos, colors, photography for you. Or it will take designs that you have and reformat them or recreate them for social media posts or online advertising. And then there's content and video automation tools. There's tools that allow you to create new, very personalized videos automatically without having to have a video editor. There's AI tools like GPT-3, which is fascinating. And if you're a communication student, I would highly recommend you check this out. But it is a tool, an AI tool that writes content and copy from scratch. So if you think about this landscape, this emerging set of tools, part of the thing that we're seeing is that there's a shift happening. In my world, when you create digital experiences, the traditional way to create experiences is that you put designers and content authors and illustrators and photographers and UX designers, and they physically make the interface or the screen. So the shift that's happening is that the screens, the content, the sites, the apps that people experience from organizations is now being developed and will more and more be developed through experience automation tools, through machine learning, through AI. And what it will lead to is an era of deep personalization, meaning that what I see is custom built for me. The content, the design, the way it functions is built specifically for me. And the thing that I want to kind of talk about from a human perspective is that humans are very empowered in the digital age. And I do believe this. I believe that the fact that we have an ecosystem of digital tools that we curate actually gives us more informed choices, makes us more powerful. So when I manage my finances, I have the 3 or 5 apps from Fidelity and Bank of America and American Express, and I use mint.com or another tool, and that's my collection of apps. Whereas Ethan may have a totally different collection of apps, or even my wife has a different collection of apps. And you think about that collection of tools, whether it's websites or apps or content, for managing my finances, managing my social interactions, managing my news consumption, managing my healthcare, managing my relationship with government, or even my benefits from my work. Everybody today has their own personal digital ecosystem. And, the promise of the internet is that that's a very powerful personal journey, is curating and collecting your own tools to manage your life. Well, it is and it isn't. Part of what happens right now is that people are very overwhelmed with their digital ecosystems, especially in this COVID era where everything has shifted online so fast and so radically. Part of why this is because those tools that you interact with to manage your finances or your health or your school or whatever it is, they're published by different organizations. And those organizations don't integrate with one another. They don't have an incentive to. At best, maybe you can log on with your Google ID or your Facebook ID across 5 or 6 different things, but the data doesn't work together. So who's responsible for bringing that data together? Well, you are as the user. And part of why our digital lives feel so overwhelming right now is because we have this challenge where our digital ecosystems contain an enormous amount of information and data, but we as humans are responsible for integrating all that together. That's why it feels so overwhelming. And here's where it becomes a social and a societal and a cultural and an ethical problem, which is that there's experience inequity across that ecosystem, across your personal ecosystem, and what you can manage is very disproportionate when you think about technical access, When you think about financial status, who can buy premium services or not, language skills, if something requires a high degree of sophistication or technical jargon to navigate, but then also just general digital acumen. The traditional definition of the digital divide and where that term came from was at the beginning of the internet era, describing how individuals had access to technology and bandwidth and computing power, and those who didn't. And that still exists. That still exists. A great example of that today is that in the New York City public school systems, in the shift to distance learning, many of the tools that students had to use required a desktop computer. But many families in the New York City area only had a mobile phone, maybe a tablet available to them. And so suddenly there was a digital inequity because of technical access. But there's also places where you have multiple tools that require a great degree of digital or language sophistication in order to navigate. And so here's where this becomes a societal problem, is that people that can afford multiple computers, or that have the language skills, or have the time to navigate, or can buy premium services, have a fairer, more privileged use of digital tools than those who don't. That's a huge issue. That's a huge issue. And suddenly that promise of the internet as the great equalizer is diminished. It goes away entirely. And so part of what I've been working on with a group of people for the past year, and Ethan and his team have been key collaborators here, is this idea of, we have to address this inequity, but we also have to design more personalized services. And the challenge here, going back to every organization is now a digital publisher, is there's just not enough humans. There's not enough experts to design, to create content, to write apps, to write tools. There's not enough to be able to normalize or equalize this, or to make it personal. So we have to embrace automation in experience creation. We have to embrace tools that allow us to create design, to create new apps, to create new screens, to create more content, to create more visuals. But that comes with a very, very challenging ethical dilemma. Part of what happens in experience creation, if you think about it like that, is that you rely very heavily on all those different tools to put together those individual screens or apps or sites for the individual. So the model that we're looking at for how to think about this is what I describe as the inheritance model for experience bias. So inheritance is a concept that's pretty common in the computer science world. It's the idea that some function is inherited from another function in order to build on top of it. So digital experience, again, talking about websites, apps, social media content, tools, what a customer or a user or a citizen or a student sees on a screen, that's an experience. The bias of that experience is inherited from the tools that that's built from. So this breaks down into four major areas. The first is around content and language. So where does the content that is in an app or a site or a post or whatever, where does it come from? Does it require special knowledge? Does it require special skills or technical jargon or special abilities? The next is user interface complexity. So the screen that you interact with, the way an app works, is that being built by some other tool? Is it being imported? Is there an automation tool creating that? And how difficult is it for someone to navigate within a particular app or a website? And then you move into the next one, which is ecosystem complexity. And ecosystem complexity means, how hard is it for any job that I'm trying to do in my life? How hard is it for me to navigate across those tools? So for example, if I'm trying to navigate being sick, and I have to interact with 5 different insurance companies and 2 different hospitals and doctors. And, you know, if in the case of COVID, maybe even a city administration or a state or government administration, how hard is it for me to navigate across those things? And I'll talk about that in a second. And then there's design and content automation, which is, does a tool that is generating the experience dynamically through AI or machine learning, does that in and of itself have data-driven or algorithmic bias that's brought into the experience? So this model, we have to begin creating standards for. We have to begin having a dialogue around experience creators, designers, writers, communications experts. We have to think about how the technology that we're using shapes them. And so I'll give you a couple of examples of where this comes to life. The first one is, I took this screenshot on Sunday. And this is the New York State COVID-19 page. This is the page that you need to go to see if you qualify for getting a vaccine right now. Now, I'm not showing you any of these examples as a condemnation or criticism. What I'm trying to do is to show you an example of this model that I presented to you on the last slide. In this case, this is an example of what I would describe as both content and user experience complexity. As a designer, I can tell you, I don't know where to look on this page. I don't know where I would go to get the vaccine, like literally on this page. If I don't have the language skills, or if English is not my first language, and this is, in fairness, the site is translated into multiple languages, but the copy that's on here is incredibly difficult to decipher. I actually personally read this page a bunch of times trying to figure out where I was supposed to go, like what I was supposed to click on next, what am I supposed to do? And there was a Reddit thread last week that a group of volunteers independently, just out of the blue, said that they would get together and help anyone who was qualified for the vaccine navigate the digital steps they needed to go through to be able to understand how to get an appointment to make a vaccine. The fact that you have people assembling out of the blue to help people navigate an essential service, that means that service is broken. And I'm not saying the New York State is broken. I'm not saying that their digital effort isn't, trying to do the right thing, but this is a great example of there is bias inherent in this. This serves different people with different levels of success. That's a problem, right? And this, in this case, in my mind, comes from UI complexity and content issues. Another example that I would show you is, as I'm presenting this, I'm realizing I'm picking on New York State quite a bit, but this is the New York State Department of Education distance learning set of tools. If you go to their website for distance learning, there is a laundry list of digital tools. This is about a quarter of the digital tools that they've listed on that site. And to their credit, what they're doing is they're giving teachers and administrators the ability to have a lot of different ways to engage students, a lot of different tools with which to use. But if you talk to any parent that is engaged in helping manage distance learning for their child, 90% of them describe an incredible amount of complexity of navigating from one tool to the next, that every class or every teacher has a different set of tools. So while we've optimized for giving teachers flexibility, the receiving end of that is an incredibly complex digital ecosystem. And if I don't have the technology access, many of these require a desktop computer. So right there, you have an economic divide, but they require different logins, navigating different tools, very different types of experiences. So I think what we're doing here is contributing to the overall complexity, which again creates new types of privilege, and that's a challenge. Another example here that's actually ironically from 2017. So this is not all about science fiction, is Netflix has been creating visuals, graphics, promotional material using machine learning for quite some time. This is an example from their blog where one of the things they describe is, if you look on the left, this is the architecture of how the screen is laid out, of what they want to show you, the way where they're going to promote certain items and how they're going to lay it out. And even that is generated and optimized for you as a customer based on what you've clicked on before. But the point I want to show you is on the right, which is they've created tool sets that, by virtue of understanding and looking at what different visuals you've clicked on or movies you've looked at in the past, it will automatically pull together and sometimes even automatically create graphics that are promotions for you. So if you have seen a movie, multiple movies with Uma Thurman, it's going to promote Pulp Fiction by showing you a Pulp Fiction poster with Uma Thurman. Great, right? So that helps Netflix with really personalize, really drive people into their content. But what sort of cultural bias are we letting the machine learning algorithm propagate there? I think these are the kinds of things that within the design community, within the content creation community, there's no discussion around. And there's only barely the beginnings of a data automation and algorithmic bias conversation within the data and the computing community about this. There is no dialogue about how experience automation propagates things like cultural bias for designers or for content creators. We have to start those conversations. The final example I would give you is looking at, there is a whole ecosystem, universe, industry emerging around what's described as the no-code tools. So these are tools that allow you to create websites, to create mobile apps without having to write any software. So this is a great example. And again, I'm not picking on anybody, but this is an example of a company called Thunkable. And you can go in and pick from existing tool sets, existing features. Here's an image browser, here's a chat bot, and you can compile your own app. You can publish an app without writing any code. I just recently published the website for experiencefutures.org. I didn't write any code. I'm a coder by training. I didn't have to write any code. I used a tool called Webflow to do this. So there's any number of tools out there. But if I'm using a tool that automatically builds software based on algorithms and data and user experience, well, then any bias built into that tool, I'm inheriting. I'm, without knowing it, buying into it. What are the ways that I'm disadvantaging people? What are the ways that I'm making it difficult for certain populations to use? If I just simply import someone else's interface or tools, well, then any bias in their system is now inherent in my system as well. So that's a great example of this the idea of inheritance in bias. So just to kind of like conclude here, the two topics are really about experience bias. What is it, right? And it's created today. The bias that we have in the system is now created by one size fits all apps. I work for a Fortune 50 company. I make apps and websites, and I'll tell you, we can only afford to create a certain type of site or a certain type of app for a very specific customer set. And the same is true for people who publish for education or government or whatever. Is you're going to design one thing. Sure, it may be personalizable, but it's one thing for everyone who interacts with your company. That's the current way of thinking for digital publishing. But what we need to get to is a place where equity comes from the right thing built for the right individual, right? I think that there actually is a core idea from the internet era that has to get dismantled, which is the internet. In the beginning, there's a lot of talk about the internet's the same thing for everybody. It's equal for everybody. And I think at the beginning, that's democratic. But where we are right now is not everybody needs exactly the same thing. In fact, some people may need more visual descriptions, or some people may need more information or less information, or something that's much more about giving them the tools or walking them through something or answering questions in advance for them. And so experience equity is about building the right experience and the design and content for the needs of that individual. And that is too big of a problem for digital publishers to take on without relying on machine learning and AI. I believe we need to rely on machine learning and AI, but we need to do it ethically. We need to bring in data standards ethics. We need to bring in AI ethics. We need to bring in an understanding of the cultural bias, and we need to bring in an understanding of how we are creating digital privilege in a disproportionate way in our digital lives. So that's why we started experiencefutures.org. And this is it's a not-profit organization. We're not affiliated with any organization. It's a completely independent side project. It is not part of my employer. And it's a community of experienced creators, community leaders, thought leaders, people who believe that we need to make our digital lives more empowered and more equitable. And it's a careful way to apply automation, machine learning, and AI to that problem so that we can both create more equity, but also ensure that we've got the right ethics to protect against those bias problems. So our belief is that we will have a future, and we can have a future and should, where people are much more empowered online and empowered through tools like AI and machine learning, but in a way that's much more carefully considered. Because right now I see these tools being applied without that thought, without that planning. So I'll stop there, but thank you very much. And I'm happy to take any questions and dive into anything.
Fantastic, Howard. Thank you very much. We do have some questions that have come in through the chat or through the Q&A thing. Anybody who's wanting to pose a question, please, by all means, put it in there, or a comment if you have one. Howard, if you're done screen sharing, there you go, great. So let me just start with the first one that was submitted by Arabella Pollock. It's so nice to sort of see you through this webinar. Arabella asks, what if you don't want that data shared and integrated because of privacy concerns? And she also noted that sort of educated or affluent folks may be more aware of the value of their privacy and data, and therefore that could create yet another divide, kind of a divide and a divide. How are you thinking about that?
I think that's great. I'm really glad you mentioned that. I casually skipped that entire subject in describing this. But I think you raise a really, really good point. There is a very, very valid reason why organizations don't share that data, right? In talking about it the way I'm talking about it, I'm just trying to describe what the human experience is of that outcome. But yeah. So organizations don't share data with one another because of very real privacy issues, right? And that they're both legal issues, but also ethical issues involved in that. There's governance rules attached to that. Obviously, as you get into different markets, different laws, et cetera. That's a huge challenge. And I don't have an answer for that, but I think that there are a lot of organizations that are addressing how data could be shared across organizations in ways that protect the individuals. Some of that is about using technologies like the blockchain in order to be able to have public ledgers for certain types of data. And at the same time, there's other technologies that put the data actually in the hands of the users and pull it out from the organizations, such as there's a privacy-oriented browser called Brave. And the whole point of that browser is to allow you to manage the data, and all the organization sees is the summary or the checksum or the result of that. And so there's a lot of different groups that are looking at how data can be exchanged and proliferated in safe and ethical ways. So I'm just casually avoiding that because that's not the focus of this organization, but I'm well aware that that's a big problem.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting point as well. I mean, and in our digital media and analytics class, I point to the Brave browser as a really interesting model to give individuals control of their data and actually the ability to monetize it. So like if you want more information from me, yeah, maybe that's worth something. You give me a micropayment. Yeah. And I think it's equally interesting to hear Facebook, literally, they have an ad campaign right now asking for more data interoperability and open standards around data exchanges. And whenever Facebook starts to advertise on NPR, I get really nervous to me, what I hear is they're trying to do an end run around an open standard, frankly. But it's a very interesting point there. Thank you for that. And let me go on to our next question from Steph Vigiano. Thank you for your question, Steph. It is there a movement to push accessibility standards for digital experiences? And are there any sources you'd recommend to learn more or get involved?
Great question. So the main standard that exists right now is the American Disabilities Act, ADA. And ADA has governing requirements for the way the interfaces are designed and created. It has testable standards, which are mainly focused on things like certain types of content, certain design elements, contrast, to allow screen readers to be able to navigate it. But that is a very, very hyper-specific standard, both focused on design and focused on a very specific population. So I think when you get into experience design, because again, like this is like a lot of, as I've gone through this journey trying to present or share this organization with people, I've been surprised by things that are natural words for me. Like the term experience is just bread and butter for me, but for a lot of people see it as jargon, right? The word experience, the way I'm defining it, is the combination of the design, the user experience design of the app itself, the visual design artifacts, the graphics, the photos, the illustrations, the content, and the way it behaves for you. The collection of that is your experience. There is no standard around how to think about the experience overall. There's standards around design. There's standards around privacy rules. There's standards around things like that, but there's not standards around the experience overall. That's actually one of the things that the organization is going to attempt to address.
That's great. And I think that's so important there. There was one question just around a particular vector of inequality, and it's regarding age. The question's from Rachel Pfeiffer. How can we address the inequity regarding age? I understand your example of socioeconomic status, but I asked this after I just signed up my mother and 4 of her friends for the COVID vaccine. So age as a vector of inequity.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's a great question. I mean, the way that we've been looking at it, and I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done here. And candidly, this is part of where we need partnership with academic organizations, is that there's a lot of intelligence and insight around not only data, but proxy models that we can use for this. The way I've been thinking about it is that age is not the delineator. It's what I would describe as technical or experience acumen. I think there are populations that need much simpler interfaces. More commonly, we will say that older people need simpler, but that's kind of a generalization. I don't think so. I don't think there's a experience delineation based on age. I think it's more there's experience delineations based on high or low content, simple or complex interfaces, more or less choices, and that those are cohorts that cut across demographic designations.
That's really helpful.
I wouldn't describe it as age. I would describe it as there may be common things that people that are older tend to need, but those are not exclusive statements.
That's a really useful reframing, especially because you have, you could be young, but be visually impaired and not have excuse me, a certain educational background. And you might have the exact same requirements as, a grandmother who, for whom a lot of digital technology is new, right. You may have impaired eyesight.
And I think that also gets into the difference between, we're going to have a version of our tool or our app for this population and a version of our tool or our app for this population, versus we're just going to customize the app for you. We're going to learn about you and give you the tools to customize it or customize it for you with your collaboration. It's just a very different dynamic. I believe we have to get to there's this great article from a while ago. I think it was in, I can't remember which book it is, but Malcolm Gladwell book. He was talking about the search for the best pasta sauce and about this guy who, you know, like Procter and Gamble or somebody like that engaged him to find the perfect pasta sauce. And what he came back with is that there's not the perfect pasta sauce, there's perfect pasta sauces, that everyone has different pasta sauce needs. And it's one of the reasons why you see shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves of different variations of pasta sauces, because there is no right one. And it's the same thing with any digital publishing. There is no right, but like there's only one Seamless app.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's only one American Express app.
Yep.
You know, and it's like, and organizations that have multiple apps are criticized for being confusing, but what we need is those apps to morph for your needs.
Right. If it can configure around my known abilities, disabilities, and preferences, as opposed to me having to make that selection on the front end.
Which just requires so much more computing expertise and so much more technology, which the experience and design community are ill-suited to use right now, both from a technology and an ethics perspective.
There's a question about regulation. I know that that's one of the aspirations of the organization, is to ultimately affect what may happen in the regulatory sphere. This question comes from Milan Fredericks. How will the use of AI to develop and maintain these necessary digital experiences be regulated? The ethical implications of AI are obvious because there's no longer a team of humans in there, but human intervention is necessary to write these algorithms. And that opens up the opportunity for bias to be literally written into the code, as you've said. How do you think that might be addressed at the regulatory level?
Yeah, so I think that the it's kind of a two-part answer. One is that I think that sorry, my the joys of working at home.
I hear Brooklyn in the background. Sounds good.
So a two-part answer. One is that in the model that I'm presenting, and the reason why I framed it as an inheritance model is we digital publishers, I'm assuming most people on this call, if not all of you, have in some way, at some form, participated in the publishing of something digital, a website, social content, an app, something like that. If we use automation tools to build those things, we are the users of that automation, right? We are the distributors, right?
Yeah.
So our job is to have our own code of ethics, our own tests for whether or not those tools are ethical or propagate bias or not, and use them or not use them accordingly, and apply pressure to the publishers themselves, to the technology providers, as a user base, as a lobby for what we expect them to do and how we expect them to behave ethically, which is very different from, I think, what will get regulated, which is the way that machine learning and AI operates on data, the way it collects data, and things like, I think what'll get regulated is things like, what can AI do to do things like decide who gets a digital privilege or a real world privilege or a financial privilege. I think there will be regulation on allowing automation to make those decisions. But I think this topic with experience design and experience automation is really about us as the users of that, and being the ethical users of those things.
So if there's a sort of an ecosystem of tools out there, they're all downstream recipients of regulation. And so that might inform how they treat data, privacy, and so on, and confidentiality. Like those things may actually have a regulatory sort of, there might be some regulation affecting them, but ultimately what you're saying is that universe of tools, it's the users of those tools, those designers and creators of content, who then need to come to that tool set with a ethical framework, which would sort of inherit the regulation in a way.
I think that's right, and I think that the subtext of the regulation part of the response is that we're nowhere near being able to understand, how to create efficient regulation around this.
Look at the discussion of Section 230 right now. Just trying to decide whether Facebook's a publisher or a platform.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
And
we
yeah.
don't even have the language. We don't even have the language for it. I mean, the internet is a series of tubes. It's not far behind us.
Yeah, that's true. It was just a moment in time ago. So we've been talking about visual interfaces. My colleague and friend Matt Sawyer asks, what's your point of view on the potential benefits and issues associated with smart speakers like Echo and smartphone virtual assistants like Siri?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is just one form of user interface, right? Voice is one of the types of user interface for computing, and so I think it's going to have its own challenges. I think one of the things that we've learned right now is that so many of those voice activated systems have to be spoken to in a very specific way. And what ends up happening is that we end up learning the way the speaker needs to get spoken to more than the speaker learns how we speak.
Yeah.
And I think that reversal will happen. But there is an enormous intersection with language here. And I actually have a colleague that's doing a lot of work. She's a computational linguist by training, and she's been doing a lot of work on how will language be impacted by us talking to computers, and what will computers need to do to understand natural language in a much more effective way, because we have inference, we have innuendo, we have cultural references, we have, and so the same problems that I'm describing, you could have the entire subject that I'm talking about applied just to voice.
Yeah,
right. So
I can tell you,
it's as big of a topic.
Yeah, the effect on the language for me has been a increase in the incidence of the use of expletives while talking to inanimate objects. That's a new one for me. So we've got another question from Pandu Maulana. Forgive me if I've mispronounced your name, Pandu. What are the chances that AI is going to be used for nudging people to make more responsible and ethical decisions? It sounds like this idea of the nudge in user interfaces, we're seeing things like with Robinhood, with the Robinhood app right now in the news for doing all these nudges and gamification that has led to some really bad and destructive behavior in terms of people taking risks and so on, and that's all about a user interface. What do you think the chances are that this AI might be applied in ways to get people to behave ethically?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one lesson of this era is that one person's ethics is another person's travesty.
Yeah.
And my personal opinion is that a tool that automates the decision making of what a human should do is backwards. I think that we need to maintain the position of being the users of the tools versus letting ourselves get to a place either culturally or otherwise to where the tool sets, the platforms are nudging us to do things but that will happen, and it is happening.
Yeah.
Right. I think the thing that I'm trying to shine a light on is it's happening without us knowing it.
Yeah.
If I make an app with a no code tool, I'm bringing in those nudges, whether I'm aware of it or not. So I think what we need to do is to shine a light on it. Once you get past that and you start getting into should we or where could we, I have a bunch of personal opinions.
Yeah.
And I think that that's when I would get into this idea that ethics is a framework for decision making. There is not a one size fits all ethics. So if that's true, then AI nudging you in an ethical way to do so, or nudging you towards ethics, or you're nudging someone towards a framework of thinking. And I think that AI does not care about those frameworks. That they're not ethical. They're not ethical decision makers.
Right. There's either an instruction set in there that says
that's right.
These are ethics, or they could just be.
I mean, this is
just as well.
And I think this is where it's like, Ray Kurzweil's The Age of Spiritual Machines comes to mind, right?
Yeah.
You get into this thing about like, at what point do those machines, like, do we give those machines privilege in terms of the effect that they have on us as humans? But I would say this, that I do believe that the most important thing is for us to shine a light on where we are being nudged through automated processes. I think at very least, we have to start by being aware of where it's
Yeah.
happening. And we don't even
Yeah.
have the language for it. We don't
And
even
those
have, we don't have the cultural dialogue around it right now.
and those often do end up being design patterns that
That's right.
designers are exploiting. So I want to go back. I want to talk a little bit about experiencefutures.org again. We've talked about the cost to individuals quite a bit, but one of the points that we discuss in the white paper that's forthcoming is the cost to institutions. So what is the? I mean, it's like, we have design thinking. Isn't that great? Isn't that agile enough?
Yeah. So when I started my career, I was part of a design collective, like one of the first digital design collectives, and I was the programmer in the design collective. And I remember there were some old school designers that were part of, our network and whatever. And I remember one of them coming in one day and saying, "You guys use computers to design? That's cheating. You're not, like, why are you using so our vision, our view was that we were making something with the help of this technology. Their view was that we were skipping all the important parts of design by cheating and having the computer do big parts of it for us. Well, that's kind of we're at a similarly pivotal moment with experience creation and design, where right now the state of the art for making digital experiences is you get a bunch of people together to look at it from every different possible angle. And the innovation is its design, its development, its business value coming together to, that's, like, to do iterative thinking, but it's very labor intensive. It's very human intensive. And by the way, the outcome of that is typically one version for one set of people.
Yeah.
So the cost to organizations is that they all know that that they have a design debt, that they have too much design to make versus the resources they have available. So we have to, everyone's looking for less expensive ways to make these designs. So it's part of its cost. The other part of it is that customers are demanding better experiences, more personalized experiences. But then that goes back to the cost issue. Is like, how do we make that work?
Right.
So the impact to organizations is better experience, better engagement, better personalization, lower costs to create more personalized experience. This train is happening right now. I'm jumping straight to the last part of the punchline, which is, if you're doing those things, if you're automating those things and you're using those tools and you're making more personal, then we have to start talking now about the ethics and the bias issues and the training and the standards of that. Because if we don't do that now, it's going to be imposed on us by 6 different tool makers.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be talking about the ethics of it.
Why has there been so little discussion to date so far? I mean, a lot of the conversation about ethics in design does tend to be around accessibility.
Yep,
it does
which is
tend to
super
be
important.
around
Yep.
diversity, and these are
Yep.
important. It doesn't tend to orient. And is it because it's emergent? I mean, you said it's, the train's left the station here.
Yeah, well, it's leaving the station. It's more like we're using these tools and we're not even aware that we're using them. I went into a group of my peers and talked about where experience automation is happening. And this is a term that, like, is an imperfect term. It's not an industry standard term. Like, I keep talking about it, but it's not like there is a lot of dialogue about experience automation, but that's what it is, because there's no language for it. And then, the initial reaction is, we're not automating any part of the experience. But then as we break down the tools that we're using, it's like, well, that's automated. And that's automated, and that's created by computers. And oh yeah, we don't do that anymore. Now this system does that for us.
Right.
So I think what's happened is that it's happening so organically around us that we're not aware that it's happening. And that's the first part of it, is to begin to build a dialogue that it's happening.
Howard, thank you. This has been so amazing. I've got one last question for you, but before I ask you my last question, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that they can go to experiencefutures.org. We did have one or two other questions that we didn't get to. Please do, by all means, connect with Howard. Check out the site. There's a lot of content there that may address some of your questions and open the door to new ideas for you. My last question for you, Howard, is of all the things that you could do, a person with a lot of experience and connections, a great network, why do you feel so passionately about this particular topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think so when I went to IBM, I was super inspired by this very simple idea that technology can make the world work better. And I believe that. And I believe that we are at a pivotal moment in how we use technology. And I do believe that it's not as simple as just putting everything online. It's about building our digital lives. And I think that we treat many parts of our lives with care and consideration. And sometimes our digital lives are just a tsunami of pain, right? So I personally believe that addressing this will impact the human experience. And I personally believe that we need to get to a place where our digital lives are more equitable and more empowered, because I see and witness everything that we're lacking as a professional. I see all the things we could be doing. And I see how that can affect individuals. And I want to help accelerate that future. I want to, this is not an organization that's about AI is bad. This is an organization that says, like, we need it. We really need it, but we need to do it in a way that actually benefits the humans involved.
Howard, thank you so very much. And just as a reminder to everybody, this talk has been recorded. It's going to be distributed to the Columbia SPS community. Dr. Billmeyer, thank you very much for convening us in this conversation. And thank you, everybody. Howard, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.